Hey everybody, my name is Taylor Gibson, and this is the Gr8Wyte Experience. Hey everybody, welcome to the Gr8Wyte Experience, the show where I talk about everything and anything of interest. My name is Taylor Gibson. Thank you for listening. I'm really excited to be able to sit down and record today's episode, not only because it's on a topic that I can't wait to dive into, but also because I have a very special guest on the line who is joining me to do today's episode. Joining me today is the host of the podcast Wild Weiss, as well as the co-host for the Third Line Plug, Sencast, Mr. Tim Gensey. Tim, how are you, my friend? Welcome to the show.
I'm doing good. Yeah, it's weird. I feel like we're supposed to be talking about our day and then cover athletes. I feel like that's what we're supposed to do.
I know, right? And that's what I said even before we hit record. I said it's so weird to record a podcast that isn't Third Line Plug, but you know what? Obviously, I kicked this podcast off quite recently, and when I thought about the topic for today's episode, I thought there's nobody else I want to do this with, so I'm glad that we can get together today to do it.
Yeah, no, good. And also, thanks for plugging Wild Weiss.
Always, man. Always got to plug the other podcast as well.
Yeah, well, as long as we're not here for as long as I did my last podcast on that one, I think our listeners will be happy.
Well, you know what, Tim? Even if we are here for that amount of time, I think it's going to be a great episode because today's episode is going to be on something that I know when I started this podcast, I wanted to talk about this. Today's episode is going to be on the Nintendo 64 Classic Wishlist. So, for those who don't know, a few years ago, Nintendo put out the NES Classic, that followed by the SNES Classic. Now, since then, there hasn't been a release for the Nintendo 64 Classic, and it's been one that I know a lot of people have wanted, and it's going to happen eventually. It's not, maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but it will happen eventually in the future. And this is something that, the Nintendo 64 is one of those consoles that I'm not sure whether it's nostalgia or I genuinely just love it, because whenever I talk about my favorite consoles, the N64 always comes up.
Yeah, well, it's funny because, the library for the N64 is actually quite small, especially when you compare it to its contemporaries with the PlayStation 2. And even the Sega Saturn in Japan had a surprisingly large amount of games. But there's a lot of really good and, frankly, genre-defining games on the N64. So the game was just at the right place at the right time.
Absolutely.
So that whole console was, yeah.
For sure. And the nice thing about the console is that it definitely had the built-in fan base from the NES and the SNES that would come over to the Nintendo 64. And I feel that this is the best way to segue into talking about our opinion on the Nintendo 64. Because when I look back at the Nintendo 64, it really does have a very polarizing legacy. It's beloved by many for the classic games and multiplayer experiences, and I think just because it was the first console that many people our age owned. And obviously it did have its critics. It was criticized for being marketed more to kids, the use of cartridges over CDs, the overall lack of the third-party support, and, obviously we can look at Final Fantasy VII and Metal Gear Solid being the big games that launched the PlayStation. I would like to talk with you a little bit about your opinion, Tim, because when you and I first met, the Nintendo 64 was definitely something that, well, obviously we bonded over hockey, but the N64 was something that we also bonded over back in the day.
Which is funny because I didn't own one.
Really?
I actually I bought one in grade 12 from Play and Trade. And then that one actually had a hardware default, so it would overheat and freeze. So I ended up buying the N64 I have now in Ottawa.
Wow, are you saying... So is my memory Like, is my memory kind of playing tricks on me? Because I always thought that was something that we bonded over back in the day.
We definitely played some of the same games on the 64.
Mm-hmm.
I just never owned one. I had a GameCube. That was the first console first like modern at the time console that we had, because for the longest time all we had in our house was an NES.
Really? I'm really surprised you didn't own an N64 back in the day.
Yeah, I thought about buying one a few times, and then like, yeah, grade 12 I finally was just like, you know what? Yeah, I'm just gonna buy one.
Was it the old charcoal colored one, or was it one of the
Yeah, it was one of the old charcoal ones, and I remember walking home with it, and one of my friends I used to walk home with, she was like, "Why do you have that old thing?" I'm like, "This is a great piece of fun video game history, and I'm going to enjoy Mario 64 on it."
And that's always the funny thing about the N64. Definitely was the first party support for it, because you look at it and you made a great point. You know, there's a lot of genre defining games, but the first party support on it was just top notch. Obviously, you got Mario 64, Mario Kart 64. You had all the Mario sports games,
of Time and Majora's Mask.
Yeah, the Zelda games. F-Zero was on there, and not only that, but even some of the second party stuff, emotionally from Rare, where you had Perfect Dark, you had GoldenEye, you had Banjo-Tooie and Banjo-Kazooie, you had Conker's Bad Fur Day, Diddy Kong Racing. You had all these great games on there, and when the N64 Classic does end up becoming a thing, I definitely do see that a lot of it will be very first party heavy, because the sad thing about the console is that the third party support was just non-existent on that console.
And that's kind of Nintendo's fault, because they dicked around Sony, which results in the PlayStation. They really increased the fee, like they really increased the dev fees on the dev kits, made the dev kits a pain in the ass to get. So a lot of companies then went over to Sony, and it's taken a very, very long time for Nintendo to get some of that third party support back. They got it back a bit with the GameCube, although instead of getting mainline Final Fantasy games, they got like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles. And then after the Wii, it just disappeared again. And it's come back with the Switch to some degree. Although like some of the EA games just aren't coming back.
No, and that's really sad, because EA is definitely a big supporter for Nintendo on every console, with the exception of the Wii, where you didn't see the NHL series come over. You did see Madden, I think you saw FIFA, but you didn't really see the big one, which is the NHL series here in Canada. And for myself, obviously I can gush all day and all night about the N64. I think it's time to talk about some of our own personal experiences with the console. And I know that you talked about...
One thing I do want to say is, I know there is a big criticism of not using a disc. There was one massive benefit for not using a disc: the lack of multiple minute long loading times. Like, I could imagine playing Ocarina of Time on the PlayStation 1, and the loading times might have killed them any sort of flow that the game had, because Ocarina of Time loads so quickly you don't really notice going between areas, and it's a very smooth game, except for like a few boundaries, but there isn't like I don't think it ever loads for more than like a couple seconds, because it's running off a cartridge, running off of ROM, and not reading off a disc. And that was definitely one of the really nice benefits of the N64. These games felt not quite seamless, but were very close to being seamless.
Yeah, I think the only game...
And honestly, load times are bullshit.
Oh, yeah. Totally. They are total bullshit, but I think the one game that did it very seamlessly, that wasn't originally a PlayStation game that got transferred over to the N64, is Resident Evil 2. The fact that Resident Evil 2, with the voice acting, with the cutscenes, with everything on it, it was a 2-disc game on the PlayStation. They jammed all of that on a cartridge, and it's seamless. And a lot of people like to think that Resident Evil 2 on the N64 is arguably the best port of it, just for that reason.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I was tempted to.
Excuse me.
So, when we were going to talk about games that might make their way onto the N64 Classic, I was tempted to put RE2 on there, but then I thought better of it because there's no way in hell they're going to get that sucker an M rating.
Yeah, and there's just a few, and there was very few M-rated games on the N64. Resident Evil 2, obviously, Tour Rock, 1, 2, and 3, Conker's Bad Fur Day, Perfect Dark. Like, there was just games that you will not see on the N64 Classic just because you were trying to market it to a more mainstream audience, so you won't see anything above teen.
Although I wonder if, given the modern standards for an M rating, would any N64 save Conker's Bad Fur Day even get an M rating from the modern ESRB? I actually doubt it.
I don't think so, man. Because I have it. I have a box copy in the other room. And even playing it today, I'm almost shocked that game came out in the N64 because the N64 is very known for its cutesy platformers, and Conker's Bad Fur Day is the most opposite game of that. It's a great game, and it's held up very well, but I think one of the big things that really helped Conker's Bad Fur Day was that it came out right at the end of the console's lifespan. So obviously it came out, Nintendo was like, oh, okay, well, our focus is more on the GameCube at this point, so we're not really going to worry too much about it, but, I mean, it's such a great game, and I can't say that about a lot of the collectathons on the N64 from Rare, like Donkey Kong 64, I think is not a great game. I never got into the Banjo games.
The less we talk about Donkey Kong 64, the better.
Yeah.
Because that game is collectathon hell. Like, it's actually dog shit.
Very much so. So, you will hear me cough a lot in this episode. Right there, I don't know what it is. It's just that scratchy feeling right there. I can't seem to lose that, but it's just because of what I'm drinking. I'm just drinking that pink lemonade mix, so it's good stuff, though. Good stuff. So, do you want to talk a little bit about our experiences with the console, Tim? Because I feel that you and I definitely have two very different kind of experiences with the console, where you said that you did play it when you were a kid, but you never owned it. And I'm the opposite. I owned it right since I was a little kid, and I've held on to it this entire time. Like, after almost 25 years, I still have my original copy. I still have some of my original games. And there's so many memories I have of playing the N64, either with my brothers, playing it with my cousins. There's so many games I could talk about. Obviously, GoldenEye, I could talk, Perfect Dark, Mario Party, Mario Kart, Diddy Kong Racing. There's so many great first-party multiplayer experiences on that console.
Funnily enough, like, the thing that I remember most out of the N64 was just, I mostly had it when I was living in dorms, right? So people would be surprised that I brought the N64 for controllers with me. And then people would be like, oh, wait, you've got that? Oh, let's play some Smash. Like, it was always, let's play some Smash Bros. Or let's play the guys would be like, oh, let's play some GoldenEye. And that was really it. It was like just kind of bonding over these games with people you just met. And I know one of the first things Chelsea and I did together is pull out Smash Bros. When we started dating almost about 9 years ago now. Yeah, so it's there's a lot of really good memories in the multiplayer games. Unfortunately, because of when I did pick it up, I really didn't have much time to play the single-player games. So, like, I only completed Legend of Zelda and Majora's Mask this Christmas. Like, I was finally like, okay, you know what? I'm going to sit down. I'm going to play these because I can't go home for the holidays, so I might as well do something interesting. So, I played through Ocarina of Time, and it's funny because I used to think that the game was, from what I played a bit of it, first few dungeons, and I used to think the game was pretty overrated. Playing through Ocarina of Time with a more critical eye, I realized that, no, this game is revered for a reason. The game flows very well. At almost no point do you really need a game guide. The dungeons work really well, and they're really fun to go through. The combat works very, very well. And most of the nitpicks that people have to say that it's kind of crap, like dumb shit, like too much walking, or the Z combat makes it feel like a different game are really nitpicks. Like, Ocarina of Time defined the adventure game, sort of kind of like that 3D adventure game, for a reason. It was excellent.
And that's a game. Sorry, go ahead, Tim.
No, keep going.
I was gonna say, and it's funny you talk about Ocarina of Time because I did play it a little bit when I was growing up. I obviously didn't own it. My older brother owned it, but I do remember playing more of Majora's Mask because I think I did own Majora's Mask back in the day, even though I was never a big Zelda guy, and I still am not a big Zelda guy. I could play it and I could appreciate it for what it is. But it's funny that you mentioned that you felt that from the times that you played it, you thought it was a bit overrated. And I feel that with any sort of media, when something is held to such a high standard, it's put on a pedestal, you almost kind of have a reaction of, okay, how great can this really be? And there's so many forms of media. There's so many, either from music or movies or games or whatever, where you kind of have that mindset of like, okay, how great can this be? Like, honestly, I could go back and play, stuff on the NES, stuff on the SNES that are held to such a high standard. Like, people held Super Metroid to such a high standard. And I played a bit of Super Metroid. I think it's a fantastic game. There's other forms of games like that. And it's funny you mention that because I definitely have played Ocarina of Time as an adult, and it is a great game. I just don't see myself sitting down and putting a lot of time into it. And I think that's kind of where I am with the N64, is that if I just want to sit down and pick up a game and play for 15, 20 minutes, I can. And there's tons of games for it.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the funny things. Is like that's kind of how I was going through Pokemon Stadium. Is I went and kind of ground out a team for Pokemon Stadium 2, and then I've just been slowly going through that. And it's just like, okay, I can play 2 or 3 battles here, suspend, come back, do a few more battles, suspend, or I can just play the minigames with friends. Because the Gensey family tradition for Christmas is playing a few games of Delibird. And the Delibird minigame is basically gifts come in on one side of the map and you have to get them to the other. And there's obstacles in between that will, if you hit them, you lose your love. And I learned how to stupidly good at this minigame to the point where I would be boxing people out, pushing them, intentionally sliding them into obstacles while I was making my way across the course. Like, just being an asshole about it, basically.
Yeah, and the best game for something like that is Mario Party. I could not tell you the amount of verbal fights that we've gotten into in the family from playing Mario Party growing up.
Which Mario Party?
The first one. We didn't own 2 or 3. I own 3
really?
now. 3 I own now. I will pick up 2 eventually. But yeah, the original Mario Party, we bought it, and I think there was like an entire summer. That's all we did was play Mario Party. And if you've ever played the original Mario Party, you know there's games that require you to rotate the thumbstick with your palm. I legit can still look at my palm and I can see where the blister happened. Those fucking hurt. The blisters on your hand doing that, it's like, come on, you can do it. And it's funny, you say about playing that minigame at Christmas. Playing Mario Party with my sisters now is like a Christmas tradition because obviously my cousins are much older now. They've got their full families and spouses and whatever, so they're doing their own thing at Christmas time. And that was always a thing that I always wanted to continue at Christmas time. So like when both my siblings were still living at home, like we would say, hey, let's play Mario Party. Let's play Mario Kart on Christmas Day. After we opened the presents, we already did everything, we start playing.
Yeah, and that's definitely something, like I know with Chelsea and I, it's usually at Christmas. Like if we have the N64, if we're to play with the 64 on Christmas Eve, we'll usually do it Christmas Eve. If not, it'll be before we head out to wherever we're going.
Mm-hmm.
Because it is a bit of a pain to lug the N64, just because you have to pack up all the cables and bring all those cartridges.
Yeah, unless you get it, say, on a Raspberry Pi or something, where you can bring it with you. But there's just nothing like playing the original carts.
Mm-hmm. Or playing on, especially because I went and bought I took it off someone's hands for free, a Sony Trinitron, and I think I've told the story on a previous episode of Third Line Plugs where we dropped it. But yeah, like I went and got this damn TV for the purpose of playing retro game.
That's right. I do remember you telling that story now, because you guys were getting it into the house and you dropped it, or getting it out of the car.
We got it out of the car safely, and then we tried to pick it up again, and it rolled.
Oh man!
And once it starts rolling, you can't. The TV was 165 pounds. You're not stopping that thing.
No, it's like that old Sony TV we had in the basement that I played my old school games on. That thing was a beast. That thing was so heavy. How we ever got it down the stairs, I'm shocked.
Well, Chelsea and I, we were originally like, oh, we'll put it upstairs in our guest room. No, that's not going upstairs.
No. So when talking about experiences with the console, and a tradition that generations of kids growing up now, and it's sad that they will never know what it was like to go to a video store to rent a game. And for me, I have so many, and it's funny, when I was putting this episode together, one of the things I had to do was go back in my memory bank and definitely think about all the times I went to, not so much Blockbuster, but I went to some of like the smaller chain video stores and rent games, because they're always on the wall, and every video store always had that distinct smell. I don't know if it was from the plastic, whatever chemicals they used on the tapes, whatever the hell it was. Every store had that smell. The second you open the door, you know you're going to get a game, you're going to leave, and it's going to be awesome.
Although at the other end, what if you rent a shitty game?
Funny you mention that, because I remember there was a video store over by my dad's place called Video Stop. It was on Shelburne, and it was kind of in this little strip mall that was like right behind the 7-Eleven. I think it's a Subway now or whatever hell it is, but there was a video store there, and obviously this is during the days that wrestling was super popular during the Attitude Era and Monday Nitro and all that stuff. And ECW had a game, I think it was Hardcore Revolution, and I saw the box and I was like, oh, that's kind of cool, I should rent that. I put it on the counter. The guy looks at me, and I'm maybe, I don't think I was 10, I think I was like 8 or 9 years old. He just looks at me and goes, I'm going to tell you this, man, I would not rent that. He says, I rented it. It's a terrible game. And he's just like, no, seriously, like, put it back, dude. It's not worth the time. And it's funny, for that very reason, I saw loose copies of it over the years, and I never picked it up. And I bought one, and I played it, and I remember thinking to myself, that guy was right. This is a terrible game. Because, honestly, it's a reskinned version of WWF Warzone, which I never liked. I never liked Warzone on the N64. It was such a pain in the ass to try and control, especially after you play the Aki WWF games. It's like, this is... Yeah. Why? Why are you like this? It's more like a fighting game, because you have to... all the button combinations you have to utilize in order just to make a punch or make a grapple.
Right, and it's not a good fight game.
No. And I mean, obviously, going back to what I was saying about, like, going to rental stores all the time, like, I could think of all the games that I rented over the years, and there were been some really great ones that I remember. Like, I remember renting... what did I rent back in the day? I don't think it was Ocarina of Time. There was like a it was a first-party game. Oh, actually, it was 1080 Snowboarding. That's what it was. I remember playing that as a kid, and I was like, this is kind of fun. Like, this is kind of cool. And I play it now, and it's just... it kind of is what it is. Which is kind of sad, but... I mean, obviously, I have so many memories of just renting games, and my dad took me to Video Stop all the time, and like we would pull off Mackenzie. I think it was onto Cedar Hill. It was like right before Shelburne, and we come around the bend right onto like Feltham. And he looks at me, he goes, "Do you want to go to Video Stop to rent a game?" And I was like, "Okay." 'Cause I'm like 7 years old. Like, what am I gonna say? No.
True. Yeah, it's like I remember my parents. We didn't rent games very often, but we'd pick up like one or two kind of like around like Easter, birthdays, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So we just kind of passively built a collection that way.
Yeah. Did you ever know anybody that rented the console from, say, a Blockbuster?
No.
I remember there was a kid I hung out with, and he did that. It was like a birthday, and he rented an N64, and I think it came with the console. It came in a case. I always remember it came in a case, 4 controllers and like 2 games.
Yeah, no, I've never seen anyone do that.
Yeah.
I always saw it as an offer, but I guess most people that I hung out with, the parents would just be like, "Oh, I'll just buy it."
Yeah. And when speaking about the N64, and I don't think I really ever talked about this on Third Line Plug, but I will talk about it here, was that there was a couple of years there where I did actively collect N64 games in the mid-2010s, and honestly, I had almost 200 games. And I had some of even the really rare games like Ogre Battle and Transformers Beast Wars. I didn't see Clay Fighter 63.5 Sculptor Edition or Sculptor's Cut until the last time I went to Epic Games in Victoria and they had a copy for almost $900. And I was like, no. Even if I was collecting, I was not going to willingly drop $1,000 on a game.
Yeah, I have a buddy who has pretty much the entire catalog except Clay Fighter.
Yeah, because that's a game that honestly is just so ridiculously expensive. And from what I understand, it's not worth it. It's not that great of a game. It's just, there just wasn't many copies made.
Wasn't it? It wasn't a rental exclusive, or
I think it was. I think it was kind of like Indiana Jones. I think it was a Blockbuster exclusive. Yeah. Which I think that was one of the games I bought back in the day was the Infernal Machine.
Right.
It's not a good game. If you've ever played the original Tomb Raider, it's kind of like that. It doesn't control well. It's just not a great game. And it's funny because, like, Indiana Jones never really had many video games based on it.
Oh, it really didn't.
No, and it's funny, well, even nowadays, like, you have Tomb Raider, the Uncharted series have come out, and they've had just fantastic games on the PlayStation. So, it is kind of shitty that Indiana Jones never really got those kind of games, but, you know, what are you going to do, right?
That's true.
Yeah.
And that's kind of one of the hard things, like, especially with those Blockbuster-only games. It's like, some of them weren't actually very good. Like, Clay Fighter kind of sucks.
Yep. Clay Fighter wasn't very good. Indiana Jones Infernal Machine wasn't amazing. I heard that the PC version I've heard is even worse than that. I know, and usually PC versions were always better than the console. Like, look at the NHL games.
Remember when we used to get PC NHL games?
Oh my god, man. I had... What did I have? 99, 2000, 2001, 2002. I had all 4 of them.
Yeah, because I had 2000, and that was head and shoulders above the N64 game.
Oh yeah, well, 2000 never came out on the N64. But you know what? It didn't matter which version of NHL 2000 you owned. At least it wasn't the Game Boy Color version, which I also rented back in the day, and it was garbage.
You made me play a ROM of that.
I literally sat there and I'm just like, I'm so sorry, dude. I am so sorry.
You were pretty gleeful to be the first 5 minutes of it. You're
Yep.
like, and then it's like, oh wait, he's gonna finish a game. That poor bastard.
I know. I was like, okay, all right, that's enough. Nope.
The game was hot garbage.
Ugh, this is the worst. So, Tim, now that we have talked about our opinion on the console, we talked about our experiences, it's time to talk about our wish list for the Nintendo 64 Classic. Now, if you've ever listened to Third Line Plug, whenever we've done any of our wish list episodes or top 5 lists, we always have some ground rules, and I 100% will follow the rules this time. Although, on the other...
We ensured we followed our rules.
Yes, even though the last time I didn't, I explained my reasoning, and I know you still give me hell for that, but I will make sure that I follow the rules this time, because I don't want to have 2 shows where you give me shit for this. So, couple ground rules before we head into it. Number one, we're going to have pick 5 games. Any genre, any series, does not matter. The second ground rule, no first-party games. So for this list, you're not going to see any of the Mario games, Zelda, Star Fox, F-Zero. Like, you're not going to see any of the first-party Nintendo titles. And the third one is no Japanese exclusives. So you're obviously not going to see Sin and Punishment, despite the fact that it was on the Virtual Console, was very popular among a lot of people. Which
no Nintama.
I'm sorry, man. No.
Bleeding heart.
And I'm surprised because I remember seeing Sin and Punishment on the Virtual Console back in the day, and I never picked it up. It seemed like a fun game. I just never ever picked it up.
It really is.
Yeah. So, Tim, are you ready to talk about our wish list for the console?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So, I'm going to start off, and I'm going to pick a game which I know 100% will not happen, since this company is now owned by Microsoft. I'm going to go for my first pick, Diddy Kong Racing. And
You know my opinion on Donkey Kong games on Nintendo consoles made by Rare.
Yes.
You always remember they're better than they are.
True. But Diddy Kong Racing, I will sit here and I will say right now, it's actually a better game than Mario Kart 64 is. Now, hear me out. Mario Kart 64 is the better party game, and it is the more well-loved of the two. But for myself, I think the reason why that I'm picking Diddy Kong Racing is just because, while I did grow up liking Mario Kart 64 more, I think as an adult, I've come to appreciate Diddy Kong Racing because, for the simple fact that it just has more to do than Mario Kart 64. Mario Kart 64 is pretty simple, pretty basic. You've got your race types, you can do time trials versus all that stuff. Diddy Kong Racing went steps ahead and had an adventure mode. And I think that's pretty cool. And while, yes, it does have a bit of the collectathon that Rareware was known for, but I don't think it's as overbearing as, say, obviously Donkey Kong 64 was. But it can be a bit of a pain in the ass because there are certain races where you have to also collect coins, you have to collect stuff during the race, and it can be an absolute pain in the ass when you're trying to beat somebody in a race and trying to collect these at the same time.
My biggest misgiving with Diddy Kong 64 is that it controls like ass. Like, it's not fun to play. Like, the turning radius on every character is kind of weird. And it just doesn't flow well, and the tracks are kind of boring. Like, outside of the collectathon part, the tracks are just kind of lame. Like, it's, I find Diddy Kong Racing a really flat game that I just don't enjoy it. Like, if I given the choice, I'd rather play one of the other better racing games on the N64, like Mario Kart or Wave Race.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the N64 is that there were so many fantastic racing games. Like you mentioned, Mario Kart 64, Wave Race. I would put F-Zero on that list. You have the very, very good pod racing Star Wars game, which is fantastic, and I will defend that to this day. The only thing about Diddy Kong Racing for me is that, and you know, I was kind of surprised when we were talking about the Virtual Console because it was never released on it. And that just, I don't know why, I just always kind of had this thing about, oh yeah, Diddy Kong Racing was totally released on the Virtual Console. And then when I was reading up on it, I was like, wait, it wasn't? But then I look back on that because if you remember, Banjo wasn't released on there, Perfect Dark was not released on there, Diddy Kong Racing was not released. Any of the Rareware games were never released on the Virtual Console. And that's a shame because that's where the Nintendo 64 really shined, outside of the first-party games.
Yeah, especially with kind of the more party shooter games. Although I'm going to include it on my list, but GoldenEye did not age well.
No, it breaks my heart, but you know what? It is true. The only other comment I can really make on Diddy Kong Racing is that despite the fact that it was quite popular, it never got a sequel. Never got a sequel. I think the closest it came was a remake on the DS, which is not that great from what I understand. I never played it, so I have no opinion on the matter. So that's my first pick. I know it's not going to be on there just because Rareware is owned by Microsoft today, but you know, I'm hopefully we might see it on the console.
Yeah, and it's funny because it probably won't be there because Rare is owned by Microsoft, but GoldenEye, the game, when people think of like N64 party games, GoldenEye is one of the games they think of. Because you just get four of your buddies, pick whatever stupid mode, like slappers only, make sure no one plays Odd Job, and just go shoot each other.
Oh man, I cannot tell. And you know what's funny? Is I'm going to say this is a game that you and I both have on our list. And GoldenEye is just one of those games where, I mean, that unquestionably is my all-time favorite video game. And I think, and I could look back with such nostalgia, but I have to look at it and take it for what it is now, which it is dated. It does not play amazingly well anymore. It looks like garbage. Jesus Christ, I played it recently, and it's so dark. I think the depot level, where it's so dark, and I'm looking around like, where the hell am I going?
What am I doing?
Yeah.
Because, like, here's the thing. For what it is, GoldenEye 64 is a revolutionary game. It is probably the first very popular console multiplayer first-person shooter. That is, like, super, super popular. And at the time, it was really fun to play, but I played it after I played it. So it's like going from a game that's a dual-stick shooter, or even like a keyboard and mouse shooter. It's really unimpressive because single analog is really difficult. Especially when you have friends that play Odd Job.
No, usually with multiplayer, Odd Job rules were often enforced where, yeah, you don't pick Odd Job because that's so cheap. And you were a dick if you played as Odd Job.
So for people who didn't play GoldenEye, because GoldenEye only has one stick, it's difficult to aim up and down. Oddjob's head is below the default cursor height. So you have to stop moving to shoot him.
Yeah, unless you use the C buttons. I think the C buttons, if you use it up and down, it'll, like, move the gun around. Even replaying it now, I do notice that it is very jerky with the motions, where, you know, if you're using the thumbstick and the C buttons, it is kind of jerky with some of the motions, and having to stop and aim is such a pain in the ass. But I don't know, I think for me, because I played it so much growing up, that if I was to sit down and play it today, there's probably missions in that where I could almost close my eyes and just beat it by memory. Like, I've played it so much. And one of my brother's favorite stories when we were a kid was that, this is when we used to live in our old house, my brother used to work at the McDonald's on Shelburne. And there was one weekend that I came down. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. GoldenEye was brand new at the time. And he was coming out of his room in the basement, and I'm in the basement playing GoldenEye. And he's like, all right, man, well, I'm heading to work. See you later. And I said, all right, bye. This is like 10 o'clock, at 9 or 10 in the morning. He comes back later at night. I'm still sitting there playing it.
Oh, my God.
And he's like, dude, have you been sitting here the entire day playing GoldenEye? I was like, yeah.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah. I think the only couple of comments I can make about GoldenEye is that that's a game that when Nintendo Wii first came out and the release of the Virtual Console, this was the game that everybody wanted so badly to be on the N64 for the Virtual Console, just because of how iconic it is. But because of licensing reasons, it never came to be. It never came to be. And even on Xbox Live, in 2007, there actually was a full-on remake or remaster, whatever that was going to be on Xbox Live Marketplace. That also never came to be because of licensing between Microsoft, who owned Rareware, Nintendo, who owned the game, and I think Electronic Arts, who owned the James Bond license. And years after the fact, the video came up online of the gameplay, and I remember sitting there, and I was so heartbroken knowing, because it looked pretty good for the time, to know that could have been. And even though Perfect Dark got re-released on, I think it got a full remaster on the Xbox 360, I never played it. I got no opinion on it, so it is kind of sad, but I really, really do hope. I know it will never happen. Just for licensing reasons, because, again, Rareware is owned by Microsoft. It will never happen, unfortunately.
And it's like, it's tough, but I think at the same time, just kind of, it's almost a game that's better left to video game history. Because I think even with a remake, you would need to add significant amounts of stuff to make the game palatable to a modern player.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of the drawback with GoldenEye today, is that it's a game that doesn't hold your hand at all. And it's a game that, if you've watched any of the Rareware documentaries and stuff, they talk about the game when they were making it, that basically they didn't make it with this mindset of go from point A to point B. They basically just made a bunch of rooms and built it around it. Which is why if you play GoldenEye today, there's certain levels that I think the Siberian levels, if you go into like some of the buildings in the fields and stuff, if you just open it and there's nothing in there, that's one of the main reasons, right? Because they basically built stuff and you just built the game around it.
Yeah, and it was really weird.
Yeah.
I get that they were trying to make it seem like a spy mission instead of like a movie chase or movie hype scene, but it felt weird.
Yeah, and it's funny because it's a game that has been completely overshadowed the movie that it's based on, and the movie itself is pretty good. It's a little bit dated today, but I mean, it's still pretty good. The only other comment I can make on this was that even though the original game never got remade or remastered, there was a reimagining on the Nintendo Wii in 2010, which I did buy, I did beat. I have not played it ever since because it's one of those games where I'm just like, I liked it, but and you will know firsthand, right? There's certain games that you play, you beat it once, and you're like, that's fun. I'll probably never do this again.
Yeah.
That's GoldenEye on the Wii for me.
Yeah.
Because that game gave me PTSD in the... It wasn't the cradle, I think it was the control level where you have to protect Natalia. It's such a pain in the ass on the Wii because she has such an annoying voice. And you're like, James, help me. And I'm just like, bitch, I hope they fucking kill you. Because even in the N64 version of the control level, which that level gave me PTSD, between that and the streets level with the tank, which is pretty cool, it's a mission I never played a ton just because, I don't know, it just stressed me out so badly for whatever reason. I don't know if it was the music, I don't know if there was a time limit put on it, or you had to be on your A game.
Yeah. I actually never really got too far into the GoldenEye single-player levels because I just didn't care enough.
Mm-hmm.
I do remember playing like a bit of GoldenEye Double Agent that came out for the original Xbox, and that game was not good.
No, I'm trying to think, because there was a GoldenEye game on... Not the 360. It was... Rogue Agent? I think GoldenEye Rogue Agent.
Yeah, Rogue Agent. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that's the game that I didn't play that. A lot of the James Bond games are actually really fun. Like, Nightfire is surprisingly pretty good, and I wish that's a game that I haven't played in a long time. That I'm like, when I look back on Nightfire, I'm just like, that's a pretty fun game, and I really wish that I had an original PS2 or an Xbox to play it today. It's a fun game.
Even the GameCube port was actually still very good. I remember Agent Under Fire being silly but fun.
Yeah, when you fire the bullets and it looks like it's hit with ping pong balls.
Or like you're using the grappling hook.
Yeah.
That in multiplayer for some reason could hook onto everything.
Yeah.
So you're just going like...
Oh yeah, it was ridiculous. it's kind of like, and obviously they took that cue from The World Is Not Enough, which the N64 part of it. I will say, even though GoldenEye on the N64 is iconic, The World Is Not Enough is, in parts, actually a better game.
I would not be surprised.
Controls better, looks better, plays somewhat better, I would say, but obviously GoldenEye is so iconic that you can't even top it. So, Tim, I'm going to go into my number 2 pick, and I think this is a game that you and I both have on our list. And yet, this is another game that I know it will probably 100% not be on the N64 Classic. And it's an absolute shame, because during the Nintendo 64's lifespan, there were a lot of sports games on there. But there was one genre of sports game the N64 nailed. And that was wrestling. And this is easily one of the best wrestling video games of all time. And some consider it to actually be one of the greatest video games of all time. WWF No Mercy.
The only thing I really remember about this game is playing it with... actually, I almost exclusively played this game on the PlayStation 1. Because when I lived in the UK, most people had PlayStations and not N64s, because Britain used to be the Isle of Sega, and then they really latched onto the PS1. Especially in the town we were living in, where everyone pirated everything. So everyone had No Mercy, and the game was very fun. And I just remember, like, half the time most of us would, like, it would be like a bunch of, like, punching up at each other, but most of it was, like, trying to find all the different hidden places you could get to in the building.
Right.
Because, like, the big thing about No Mercy, I think, really separated from others is just you could leave the ring and go fight in the hallway, go fight in the lobby, go cross the street, fight in a bar.
Yeah. Which is funny, because those were all set pieces from the TV show, Raw.
I didn't watch it.
Yeah. I think the game you're referring to is actually SmackDown. I think SmackDown on PlayStation, because No Mercy only came out on the N64. But I think for my son, which I did own back in the day, SmackDown was fun, fast-paced arcade game. But WWF No Mercy on the N64 is a game that, while it is definitely best remembered for being the top-notch multiplayer experience, and while I have so many fond memories of playing it as a kid, I mean, obviously the tag team multiplayer TLC matches, you get 4 people playing that, you're in for a fun time. I think for me, when I was putting this game on the list, the one thing that really, I don't want to say came as a surprise, but I often tend to forget, is that it has a fairly deep single-player campaign. And while the usual game modes from the past AK or Akai wrestling games, like the championship belt storyline, you go beat the belts, you do single matches, whatever. It was really the championship belt storylines that were great, because you can go for the tag titles, intercontinental, world championships, and it's fun. Like, it's such a fun game, and if you lose a match, it sends you on a different course. And it's definitely a game that you can go back and play today, and it's so much fun. I put so many hours into that.
It's almost like a wrestling visual novel?
Yes. Very much so.
Damn.
Now,
That's actually legit.
It's so good. And one of the nice things about this game is that if you're a wrestling fan, especially when it came out in 2000, every wrestler in the WWF that you can think of is in this game. You have Stone Cold, you have The Rock, Undertaker, Chris Jericho, Mankind, Kane, Jeff and Matt Hardy, just to name a few. If, say, WWF No Mercy is put on not the Virtual Console, N64 Classic, is that some of the wrestlers are obviously going to be cut out of the game, like Chyna and Chris Benoit, obviously, for obvious reasons. And one comment I do got to make about the Akai games is, I don't know if many people would agree with this, but I like to think that the games themselves were perfect extensions of what the company's TV product was at the time. Because if you go back and you play WCW, NWO, World Tour, and Revenge, it was released at a time when Nitro dominated Raw. By the time WrestleMania 2000 No Mercy came out, the WWF overtook WCW in the ratings, and No Mercy is where they crushed them.
Right. I don't remember. Like, I remember living in the UK. Wrestling was very big. I didn't care, but I remember seeing a lot of kids talking about like WWF, and I'd only ever see like WCW mentioned in like the odd commercial spot. Like no one talked about it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, WCW was definitely more of a North American thing, where WWF was worldwide. WCW was definitely more catered to the South, like because it was based out of Georgia, so it was obviously based
Right.
out of there. But the one note I can make about this game is that there was a canceled sequel, WWF Backlash, which unfortunately never came to light. It came up right at the end of the lifespan, so that's kind of why. But the one nice thing about this game is that the online modding community, despite the fact this is a 20-year-old game, has kept this game alive. If you go onto YouTube, there's so many mods for, say, the 1980s WWF, NXT. There was one I saw for the Invasion storyline of 2001 where ECW and WCW invaded WWE, and that was kind of cool. But the one thing for me I noticed is that they had a mod for All Elite Wrestling, which is very cool because Ukes, the developer of the game, is actually developing a No Mercy style game with the director of No Mercy for All Elite Wrestling.
You must be very excited.
Dude, you cannot imagine how excited when I read that, because AEW is basically making everybody's dreams come true. Because even if you look back at the Attitude Era, like you had Jim Ross, who was with WWE, you had Tony Schiavone, who was with WCW. They're both the commentators for AEW. Any kind of wrestler you think of that you're like, oh, they should sign this guy. Perfect. Sign that guy, this guy. And of course, the big signing over the weekend, CM Punk. I watched the video online when they did one of their pay-per-views in Chicago, where he's from. I don't think I've ever heard a crowd like that. They packed the United Center just on the rumor he was going to be there. Imagine that. Imagine any professional sports league. They sell an arena based on a rumor somebody's going to show up.
But at the same time, he showed up.
He showed up, and it's amazing. Like, you go online, and there's a guy, he was just crying. He was so happy to see him. And you could tell CM Punk was just so happy to be there, and he's, like, acknowledging the fans. And even I got emotional watching it. I was like, oh, man, that is so awesome. Because you can tell, like, he loves it. He likes being there. I think he's going to be great with AEW, but that's a different conversation altogether.
That's a different podcast. And that's something I'm not equipped to talk about.
For sure.
I don't know who CM Punk is.
Well, I'll definitely, after the show, I'll definitely give you some time to Google that, because he's a very, very popular professional wrestler today.
Gotcha.
So, Tim, now that we've gotten 2 games out of the way, what do you have for your next pick?
We're going to be moving on from fighting games to a pastoral life where you get your farm going, get a dog, get a wife, get a kid. We're talking about Harvest Moon 64, which is probably one of the better Harvest Moon games. Definitely an improvement over Harvest Moon for the Super Nintendo. And this is probably one of the places where these classic consoles really shine, because as much as it's the best to play this game on the original hardware, in North America, that is very difficult to do. Well, I have a Japanese copy.
Well, especially with how either rare and or expensive it is today.
Do you want to know what the price of a loose copy of Harvest Moon is?
Sure.
$68 American. Loose.
That's ridiculous. And I think back...
Complete in box is $225.
Yeah, because I was going to say, back when I was actively collecting, I think I did buy Harvest Moon. I think I paid... the hell did I pay for that? $80 or something? $85 back in the day?
And that was complete in box, right?
Nope, that was just the loose copy.
Oh, loose. Damn, yeah.
Yep.
But yeah, so like Harvest Moon 64 is a very difficult game to find, but the farming fundamentals of it's very good. One of the things that I find a lot of Harvest Moon games can make a game really annoying is if your inventory isn't very big. It's a pain in the ass to do anything. because you have to constantly go back, swap tools, drop things, move things around.
Right.
And I found that the way that Harvest Moon 64 was set up, it didn't feel too bad. The characters, a lot of them are kind of more complete version of the characters that were in Harvest Moon for the Super Nintendo. The characters are definitely more fleshed out. The dialogue still isn't that deep. It is a Harvest Moon game, but the characters felt more whole than they did in the Super Nintendo version. So if you're looking for a classic Harvest Moon game, you can't go wrong with Harvest Moon 64. I still think my favorite Harvest Moon game to date is Mystic Magical Melody on the GameCube.
Right. Now, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but was it this game or Earthbound that NES came on Smash Brothers?
Earthbound.
Earthbound, yeah, okay.
Earthbound is a funny example as well, because that's another game that really should have been on the SNES Classic. Because that game is impossible to find, cult following, low print, that really should be on the SNES.
Yeah,
the SNES Mini.
Well, I know even with the SNES Classic, I know they put Star Fox 2, the game that never saw the light of day. So that's kind of cool. But Harvest Moon is a game that, even though I did own it, I didn't actually get around to playing it, to be perfectly honest with you. And I do know much about Harvest Moon. There was a game, like an indie game recently, I think, that took a lot of inspiration for it. And I'm sure you can...
Not just a lot.
I'm sure
it took most of its inspiration. Yeah. Stardew Valley. It is.
Thank you. Yeah, Stardew Valley. Yeah, thank you. I was trying to think of the name. I was like, I know the game. I can picture it. I can't think of the name. That's the only thing. But I've heard that game's actually pretty fun, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
So
well, Stardew Valley it's another very classic Harvest Moon. It wears it on its shirt. I'd probably argue it's better than Harvest Moon 64, but Harvest Moon 64 is definitely a landmark game. And speaking of which, I have to mod my N64 to play Japanese games.
Yeah. Well, I know there's a game store in Victoria. I think they do sell Japanese N64s.
You don't even need to buy a Japanese one, because the way that Nintendo did lockout was just fucking tabs in the N64.
Right.
So if you just cut those two out, you can slot a Japanese N64 game in.
Does it mess with North American ones, though?
No.
No?
Okay. The North American games just sit a little more loose. That's it.
Okay.
Because otherwise the pins are the same.
So I'm going to head off and talk about my third pick here, Tim. And like I was talking about WWF No Mercy, the N64 were loaded with sports games. And while, yeah, you definitely get your yearly Maddens and yearly baseball titles that nobody really goes back to ever play ever again, the one nice thing about the N64 is that the sports games that are best remembered on the console are the arcade style ones. And while you and I definitely have a soft spot for Wayne Gretzky's 3D hockey, Ken Griffey Jr. baseball was fantastic. I will maintain the NFL Blitz games were best on the N64 because I never liked the PlayStation ports. For me, the one sports or arcade sports game that I really enjoy, NBA Hang Time. And this is a game, and I think even on Third Line Plug, when we were talking about N64, I made a mention about this game, and I said, you should pick it up because it's a pretty fun game. And much like Gretzky 3D Hockey and Blitz, like I said, I always preferred the N64 ports to it. I think the main reason why is because I just think those games worked better with a thumbstick instead of the D-pad. And I cannot tell you the countless hours I played this game with my cousin back in the day. He kicked my ass every single time with the Houston Rockets, who had Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler. Even now, when I play that game, I get almost like PTSD when I see that team, and I'm just like, oh, good God. Getting my ass kicked by like 30, 40 points every time I played them. For me, anytime I play it now, I have my two go-to teams. One is Orlando, just because I always liked Penny Hardaway, and he's one of those games for me, if I can drain a 3, I hit it like nothing.
Nice.
But the other team that I have to go to is Utah. When you get John Stockton and Karl Malone together,
okay,
fantastic. And it's such a simple, fun, arcade-style sports game. I feel it's pretty good, and it's still such a great pick-up-and-play game that's really fun to play in 2021.
It's a bit of a shame that the N64 came out during Jordan's retirement period. No, wait, was he back by then?
Yes, he came up.
Yes, he was back, but not
96.
good.
But the thing is, and a lot of people don't seem to remember, is that Jordan never gave his likeness to any NBA game. It wasn't until I think one of the 2K games 10 years ago that Jordan finally said, "Okay, you can have my likeness for the game." So you go back and play any of the old school NBA games, Jordan's not in it. The only one I think there was like MJ versus Dr. J or one of those kind of games. No, sorry, that's Larry Bird versus Dr. J I'm thinking of. But yeah, there is like very seldom that Jordan ever allowed his likeness. For whatever reason, I never understood that, because he could have made a lot of money off of that, because you get paid if your likeness is in a game.
Yeah. Well, it's like, I imagine he felt like he needed to protect the brand, and I guess at the same time, he had the sneakers going and all that stuff.
But yeah,
so maybe he just didn't feel like it. It's kind of weird, though.
I'm just really surprised that he didn't allow it, but, obviously, it is what it is, man.
Yeah, well, I guess it's how Kobe Bryant got his name on a few games.
Yeah, it's true, because Kobe, on the N64, Kobe definitely had his titles. I think there was, what was the, not NBA Arenas. There was a couple of games that he had his likeness on the cover. Like, they definitely marketed Kobe to a younger generation. Courtside, thank you. But, Kobe definitely was on a couple of titles, and those games are not very good, to be perfectly honest with you. So
no.
So Tim, I would like to know, what do you have for your next game on this list, my friend?
This game was definitely iconic for like the early 2000s. It might actually have an alright chance of getting on, because most of the guys whose likeness would be in this game, they're kind of niche, so I don't think it would be as hard to sell. Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2.
Okay. Now, when you were telling me about your games list before we hit record, this is a game that actually caught my surprise, because I do remember playing the Pro Skater games on the N64, and this is a port that I will go on record say I don't think the N64 port was the better of the two. It was definitely, the PlayStation ports were definitely way better than the N64 ports, but it was definitely a game that I do remember. And I actually am very interested to know, like, why did you feel to put Tony Hawk Pro Skater 2 on the list, Tim?
Even though like the PlayStation was the better of the two ports, it still controlled really well on the N64, and the other thing that's really nice is the N64 by default has 4 controllers. So like your Skate and Jam multiplayer was just better on the N64 because you didn't need a multi-tap. And the soundtrack was freaking great. Playing as Darth Vader was fun.
You know what's funny, sorry Tim, is that the Tony Hawk games back in the day, well, obviously I did play Tony Hawk most of the time, is that if you were a fan of, say, Jackass or CKY, you notice that Bam Margera is in it. I think Bam Margera, I think there was a couple of the other Jackass guys that were in that. The Darth Vader one I do remember off the top, now that you mention that. But it's not a game that I
think you could also play as a homeless man.
I think so, yeah. It's definitely a game that I definitely played a lot on the PlayStation, but I didn't really play on the 64 because I didn't own it. I think I knew one kid when I was growing up that owned it, and we played it a little bit. So I was kind of interested when you put this on the list, Tim. And I think the only note, and I don't know if you have this in your notes, do you know this was the final Nintendo 64 game ever released in North America?
I did not.
Yeah.
That'd be a really cool game to just have on the console as kind of the close the lights.
So Tim, I'm gonna go and talk about my final game on my N64 Classic wish list, because you put GoldenEye. I also had GoldenEye on the list too. My final game is a game that I think, in regards to the series, a lot of people would probably not choose this one. because there's so many other better ones on the console, but it's the one that I played growing up. It's the one that, honestly, I feel would be the most likely to be on it just because it was in a lot of the marketing. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire.
Oh.
Now, in regards to Star Wars games in the N64, and there were quite a few good ones, I know a lot of people would probably pick Rogue Squadron over Shadows of the Empire. The only reason I'm going Shadows is because I think Rogue Squadron's kind of overrated. It's a game that I never really got into, and even nowadays when playing it, it's like, it's alright.
It's tough because Rogue Leader that came out on the GameCube as a launch title is just heads and shoulders better. Like in every way, including featuring Mark Hamill and the original voice for Wedge Antilles. And then I think they used a recording of Harrison Ford.
Well, that's kind of cool. No,
so it's just like, yeah.
No, I was going to make a podcast reference there, but...
It's like, I think Rogue Squadron, for its time, is a good game, but Shadows of the Empire is probably the better of the two.
Mm-hmm. And like I said, I wouldn't be surprised if this is the one Nintendo puts on the classic console, because it was used in the promotion of the system early on. Going back to play it now, I will admit it's not as good as I remember playing it back in the day. The one thing this game really has going for it, that opening Battle of Hoth level. You want to talk about a level that is so iconic in Star Wars games that a lot of people, when they think of Shadows, that's the level they think of. And I have to admit, even the game now, it doesn't handle very well. The hit detection's kind of wonky. And when talking about Star Wars games, there's a theory. A lot of the Star Wars games are based on Episode 1. There was a Battle of Naboo, Pod Racing, Rogue Squadron, obviously, Shadows of the Empire. Yeah, there was maybe 4 or 5 games on the list, and while I definitely played a lot of the Pod Racing game, for me, I don't know, I'm gonna stick with Shadows of the Empire, man, just because it was the one that I definitely played a lot of growing up. It's the one I have the fondest memories, and even flying around in the Snowspeeder, taking out AT-ATs in the Battle of Hoth level is so fun. And it's one where I got super pissed off playing it as a kid because, the tow cable where you're supposed to catch it to the lake and wrap it around. I could not nail it. I got so mad because I would, hook on and I ended up crashing into the leg of the AT-ATs. I'm like, ugh, damn it. But nailing it as an adult is so much fun. And also even flying around, not in the, it wasn't the Millennium Falcon, it was whatever the character's ship that was based on the Millennium Falcon, so it was fun.
It's funny because you mentioned my last game in those games that were based on Episode 1. Star Wars Episode 1 Pod Racing. That game, it took the thing that people actually liked about Episode 1 and made a whole game out of it. Yeah. And the courses were really good. The racing felt really fun, and I think the N64 port was the best of the bunch.
Oh, definitely. And while I didn't play the other ports, I definitely played the N64 port growing up. And when talking about Star Wars games that were based on Episode 1, a lot of the best ones were on the N64. I think, if I'm not mistaken, there was a movie tie-in on the PlayStation. And I remember it not being very good, because my cousin, I don't know if he owned it or he rented it or whatever. I remember playing it at his place when I was a kid. And who was I? Not Qui-Gon. It was either him or Kenobi, and swinging around with the lightsaber was kind of cool, but it's a game, when you go back and look at it now, it's so... God, it looks so terrible. But you're absolutely right, and when talking about Episode 1, the movie, the pod racing scene was definitely the best part of that movie, while I think the lightsaber battle at the end of the movie between Darth Maul, Qui-Gon, and Obi-Wan Kenobi, it's fantastic, because I have so many fun memories seeing that in the theater, and I was just like, oh my god, This is amazing.
It's just a shame that, Episode 1 has so many really cool parts. It's just the parts that kind of connect it all are just, they leave a bit wanting, right?
Mm-hmm.
But no, the pod has just like a standalone racing game. Pod racing is very good because like they have these, they go to all these different weird locations around the Star Wars universe, or just make up their own locations for you to race around.
Mm-hmm.
So like you actually get these, like in a lot of racing games, it's like, okay, it's a little weird that you kind of forced in a lava level here or whatever, or it's like it gets a bit samey if it's a real racer. But with Star Wars, it's just like, oh yeah, they just went to a fucking lava planet. Like that's just a thing. And you get these, and it's like, it doesn't matter. It's like, oh, wouldn't your like tires melt? No, you're in a freaking rocket ship.
Yeah. Well, I like when
Of course you can race around here.
Well, the funny thing is, even if when you get damage in your cart, I think if you hit L1 and R1, depending on which side of the cart you take the most damage, you can actually repair it. That's kind of neat, and I do remember doing that a lot. I do want to quickly ask about the movie itself, because I know the movie gets a lot of backlash for a lot of the stuff that's not good about it, but do you feel now, because we were, 7 years old when that movie came out, do you feel that even kids who grew up with that movie have a different perspective on that movie than the hardcore fans? Because I think that movie is, I don't want to go on record and say it's more loved now. It's definitely a movie that I think when people look back on it our age, we have a different perspective on it, because it's like, yeah, it's not amazing, but we have such fond memories attached to the movie itself that we can kind of look past that.
Yeah. Well, it's also like, you kind of attach to young Anakin, and Jar Jar Binks was less repulsive to a child than to an adult. I think one thing that definitely helps Episode 1's case is the Disney sequels. Because those movies are so, like, they're just really lazy.
Well, even the other prequels were not
where you could see they tried to break the mold, it was done in a way that was boring and still just retraced the steps from 4, 5, and 6. So it's like, okay, sure, there were creative flaws in Episode 1, 2, and 3, but there was a director who knew what he wanted to say and did something, if not great, was different.
Yeah, I think the only thing for me when talking about the prequels is that I don't think Episode 1 is as bad as a lot of people have made it out to be, only because I feel that Episode 2 was worse. I saw that in the theaters. I have not watched it in 20 years since it's been in the theater. I watched it once and I was like, okay, whatever. Episode 3 I just thought was just okay at best. I think the big thing it had going against it was that they killed off Darth Maul in the first movie. If they didn't kill him off, and they made him the bad guy like they did with Darth Vader in the original trilogy, make Darth Maul the bad guy right to the end. If you want to kill Darth Maul off and then make Anakin become the enemy as well, I think it would have made a much more coherent movie than...
Yeah, so almost take Count Dooku's character and just make him Darth Maul the whole way through.
Basically, yeah. And I'm not saying that Count Dooku was bad. Yeah, I'm not saying Count Dooku was a bad character in the prequels, because Episode 3, like, he was the best part of it. But honestly, I just think that Darth Maul had such a presence to him in the movie that I think they really shot themselves in the foot by killing him off in the third act of the first movie.
Yeah, I can see that. What's funny about Episode 2 is I thought, like, the opening sequence was really good. The ending sequence, like, was fantastic with the big fight in the Coliseum blowing up into, like, the clones getting deployed and just this massive laser, like, ground troop and Jedi fight was fucking cool.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like, the Yoda versus Count Dooku fight was pretty cool. But it's just like that middle, especially the Anakin Padme romance was something else.
Yeah. And it doesn't help that the dialogue is not good. But even the argument for Hayden Christensen in the third movie was that while, yes, there's no way he could properly deliver the dialogue, visually, when you see that kind of angry, pissed off look, guy nails it. He is so good, especially
like,
in the third movie when the young Jedi's like, "Is everything okay, Anakin?" And you just see him just turn, and all you see is that side of his face. It's like, uh-oh.
Well, it's like, you could... Hayden Christensen, like, I think his whole work as Anakin is very, very good. Because, like, you see kind of, like, the naivety disappear as the movies go on. And, like, his face carries it the whole way.
Oh, yeah.
Like, I actually think Episode 3 is actually a really good movie. Because, like, it really sells just kind of the fall of the Republic was due to the Jedi's own folly. And it really sells that feeling of regret. Like, sure, like, oh, she died of a broken heart line was really cheesy at the wrong time.
So stupid, too.
But,
yeah, I'm sure getting force choked probably did more worse damage than that.
Yeah. But it's just, so much of the movie, they managed to get the essential build-up to Episode 4 out of the way, like, done and established, without getting in the way of the rest of the movie. Because if you watch the deleted scenes from Episode 3, there's a lot of politics they just cut right out.
Yeah, because that was a big thing in the first movie, right? Is that there was so much talk in that movie that it was almost kind of pointless. There was so much dialogue that... And it wasn't good. That was the only thing. The dialogue was not engaging at all. I mean, very few filmmakers, I think, can actually make that work. Like, obviously, Kevin Smith can make it work. Tarantino can make it work. Spike Lee can make it work. But George Lucas doing it by himself for 3 movies is bad. Because there's nobody telling him that's a bad idea. Even the original trilogy, which he only directed the first one, but he was a writer and obviously got the director for... I think RoboCop or so. There was a couple of other movies in the 80s that the guy did. Empire. But I like to think that the prequel trilogy as a whole, even though it has a lot of problems, it has its own identity, and you were perfectly summed it up with the sequels, is that it's so soulless because it just rehashes everything that's already happened.
Yeah. You know what would be kind of amazing?
What?
If, like, Episode 2... like, they somehow reanimated, like, Orson Welles or something to direct it. So then, the politics of romance would have made sense.
Kind of make it like a 1984 style flick?
Oh, I was thinking, Citizen Kane.
Oh, okay. Okay, yeah, I could see that. That would be interesting, man. There should somebody on YouTube should do that up.
Yeah, try and recut the dialogue, or at least rewrite the story so you get something that flows better. Because, like, the political downfall, like the idea of this, like, a republic falling to its own contradictions is an interesting story. It's just also not what I was expecting out of my pew pew laser sword story.
True, especially for a series that was so action orientated more than... And I think that's going to the difference between Star Trek and Star Wars, was that Star Wars... Not to say Star Trek didn't have its action, but Star Wars... The movies definitely had more of the action elements done, whereas with Star Trek, it has more of the science-y kind of stuff to it.
Although it's like... Star Trek is, I think, too utopian to really play with that idea.
Mm-hmm.
Because, like, it's all about, like, post-scarcity world, everyone has everything they need, the only thing left is the final frontier sort of setting.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure they could have pulled off something like, and here's this magical, this republic that's nominally run by a democratic group, but is protected by these basically warrior monks, and then the warrior monks kind of break their own code, they get involved in the politics, and then everything goes to shit.
Well, Tim, I guess that wraps up our episode for our Nintendo 64 Classic Wishlist. Now, before we actually close this out, Tim, first of all, I want to thank you for taking time out of your schedule to join us. I know that we're usually sitting down and returning Third Line Plug, which will be coming back here in a few weeks to doing those episodes. So before we close it out, Tim, do you have any more comments you want to make on any of these games?
Not really. I think the one game that I know will definitely not be on a console like this, even though it's one of my favorite for the console, is Pokemon Stadium 2. There is no way you can get the main game to work on in a fun way because you can't. It would be way too much of a pain in the ass to work a way to load any Pokemon in. Like, you'd have to build in like a connection to Pokemon Home or something, and that's just way more trouble than it's worth.
Fair enough. Well, that wraps up this episode of the Gr8Wyte Experience. If you enjoyed this episode, comment below and hit the like button. So, Tim, again, I can't thank you enough for taking some time out of your schedule to join me for this episode. Now, before I let you go for the evening, where can my listener find Wild Wild Weiss, and also where can they find you on Twitter?
All right, so my other podcast, Wild Wild Weiss, is a podcast about competitive, or just playing the Weiss Schwartz anime trading card game. So you can find us pretty much anywhere that carries podcasts. So on Apple or Google, you just search Wild Wild Weiss. We're hosted on Spotify mostly. Or you can check out our blog at wildwildweiss.wordpress.com, or our YouTube channel, Wild Wild Weiss, where I've mostly been putting up video versions of the podcast as well. So if you want to check us out there or check our written work at the blog, go do that. Yeah, if you want to follow me on Twitter, it's at M901HoneyBadger. Obviously, I'm going to be tweeting about hockey stuff, anime stuff. So if you're into that sort of stuff, give me a follow. Other than that, I don't think there's anywhere that people want to follow. Well, yes, follow me on LinkedIn. I'm kidding.
For Tim Gensey, I am your host, Taylor Gibson, and I will see you next time.